Are you ready to look at some photos and a few videos of our 3-week trip to Oregon in the motorhome? Yvonne was with us for the first part of the trip. She flew back to Reno from Portland on the 6th of August. We spent the first 3 nights at Hat Creek Campground just outside Mount Lassen National Park. This is a photograph of the mountain. Besides relaxing around the campsite and taking some short hikes along the creek, we spent one of the mornings exploring the 1.5 mile long Spatacone Trail. About halfway around the loop trail, we crossed the Pacific Crest Trail. Of course, Yvonne and I had to explore a couple of the Spatacones. Yvonne also explored the Subway Cave lava tubes. She rode down there on a bike. It was 3.5 miles each way. We left Hat Creek early on the morning of the 1st of August and poured into a picnic area alongside Lake Britain for breakfast. That's Highway 89 crossing the lake. Our next stop was the McCloud River Falls. Yvonne and I hiked from the upper falls down to the middle falls. And these are the middle falls. Yvonne continued walking the trail to the lower falls while Pat and I took the motorhome down there. We cooled off our feet while we waited for Yvonne to arrive, and I even got up the courage to take a little dip, but I had to be careful I didn't get in that fast-flowing river. We then headed over to I-5, and just after we'd, Yvonne got a phone call to let her know that her car had been stolen from the driveway. She eventually did get it back, and there wasn't too much damage done. We then drove up to Ashland where we had lunch, and then we noticed that some oil was leaking out of the motorhome. But it didn't look too bad, so we continued on our way. We turned off I-5 just after Medford and took Highway 62 towards Crater Lake National Park. We took a side road off Highway 62 to check out a possible campsite that Yvonne had researched on the internet, Mill Creek Falls. Remember that dripping oil? Well, by the time we got to Mills Creek, it was pouring out. As it was getting late in the afternoon, we decided to spend the night here and work on the problem tomorrow. By the way, this was just a trailhead parking lot. It wasn't the campsite that Yvonne was looking for. Mill Creek Campground is about 2 miles north of Prospect. It turned out to be a drain plug washer, and we came up with a temporary solution to the problem by using a garden hose washer. The washer seemed to be doing its job, so we drove back to Shady Cove and managed to get a proper washer and a good supply of oil. As it turned out, the garden hose washer never did leak, and we didn't replace it until we got back home. After that bit of excitement, we headed back up Highway 62 towards Crater Lake and started looking for a campsite. We checked out River Bridge, but it wasn't all that good, so we continued looking for the perfect place. And we found it. Natural Bridge Forest Service Campground. Our site was right on the banks of the Rogue River. After we got settled in, we walked down the trail a 1/4 mile or so to check out the Natural Bridge. The interpretive site and trail provides information on the geological history of the Natural Bridge across the Rogue River. It disappears underground into a lava tube for about 200 feet. A small portion of the flow is released into this pool, but the main outlet is by the bridge that Pat and I were standing on. It's Monday the 2nd of August, and Ranger Yvonne is going to take us on a tour around Crater Lake National Park. It was about 20 miles from our campsite to the rim road around the lake. Viday Falls is perhaps the main waterfall attraction in the park, but waterfalls aren't exactly what you come to Crater Lake for. Our first stop was at the trailhead to the Sun Notch. Yvonne and I took off up the trail to see the view. I think that's Applegate Peak looming over Yvonne. The short uphill hike was well worth the effort. There are a series of viewpoints, and this one is looking down into Chasky Bay and the Phantom Ship Rock. This is looking northwest across the lake at Wizard Island. The Watchman and Hillman Peak are behind the island. It wasn't a good idea to step back too far when posing for a photograph. Another view of Wizard Island with Leo Rock to the right. Yvonne and I were really surprised when we turned around to see that Pat had made it all the way up to the Sun Notch. So the three of us went back to the viewpoints to look at the spectacular scenery and take a couple more photographs. We continued our journey around the rim to Kerr Notch and then had another look at the Phantom Ship from a different angle. Next we drove down the 2-mile dead-end road to have a look at the pinnacles. These towering needle-like formations of rock called fossil fumaroles projecting from the floor of Sand Creek Canyon were formed under sheets of volcanic pumice before Mount Mazama exploded and created the caldera that is now Crater Lake. At Pumice Castle Viewpoint we were about a quarter of the way round the rim road, and we've been in the park for about 2 hours. There are a number of colourful volcanic formations around the wall of the lake, and Pumice Castle has to be the most photographed. I think it was Grotto Grove Viewpoint that we pulled into for lunch. And this is the view we had out of our window. I know it's difficult to see, but the object the people in the tour boat are looking at is called the Old Man of the Lake. It's a 30-foot tree stump, most likely hemlock, and it's been bobbing vertically in the lake since 1896. There's only one trail that goes down to the lake, and it's this one at Cleetwood Cove. By 2 o'clock we made it 3/4 of the way around the lake to Watchman's Overlook. The Watchman's Overlook is one of the best places to see Wizard Island. This is looking back from where we've just come from. The large rock at the top of the centre is Leo Rock. On our way back to the motorhome, I decided to take a little side trip along the Pacific Crest Trail and started going up Hillman Peak. You can just about see me on the right-hand side of that snowdrift. No, I didn't make it to the summit of Hillman Peak, but I did take a couple of shots on the way up. Well, that's it for our tour of Crater Lake National Park. As you can tell from the photos, it was a gorgeous day. On our way back to our site, we stopped at Union Creek. We walked up the Rogue River Gorge Trail to the upper reaches of the Rogue River. Here are a few photos we took on the way up and a few videos that we took on the way back down. This is the upper reaches of the Rogue River, just before it enters the Royal Gorge. The river continues to make its way down through the gorge. And one final shot as the river continues on its way down to our campground at Natural Bridge. Back at the site, we relaxed a little before dinner and then sat around the campfire in the evening. It was certainly a full day, but a very interesting one. Oh, by the way, in the video I called it the Royal Gorge. It's not, it's the Rogue River Gorge. On Wednesday morning we drove up to Breitenbush. We booked into a site at Humbug Campground, but then drove up the road a little ways and found a much nicer site at Breitenbush Campground. Once again our site was right by a river, this time the Breitenbush River. We first visited Breitenbush in 1959 and have returned there a number of times over the years. Uncle Bill's ashes were scattered into the river in 2005. After getting settled, Yvonne and I took off in the motorhome and did a bit of four-wheeling. Well, not really, but we did go on some pretty rough roads. This wasn't one of the rough roads. We were looking for the trail that would take us to Breitenbush Gorge, and as you can see, we found the trailhead. Even though it said it was only half a mile to the gorge, we never did find it. Maybe that was half a mile to the Gorge Trail. But as you can see, we did hike through some very pretty areas, so all was not lost. Back at camp, we relaxed in the afternoon and played some rummy cubes. I'm sure I won, but the girls may disagree with that. In the evening, Yvonne and I went off and did a bit of fishing, and I caught this monster. I also took an unplanned swim in the river. We arrived at Tillagum Beach Forest Service Campground on Tuesday afternoon, But all our favourite sites overlooking the ocean were taken, so we checked into Site 22 for our first night. The next day, Site 44 became available and we moved into it. As you can see, it was one of our favourites. We ended up staying in it for 6 nights. We spent our time at Tillicum taking short walks along the beach, just relaxing and playing cards and Rummikub. Here are some of the shots we took. We had a regular visitor. His name was Herbie, and as you'll see, he was very friendly and not the least bit shy. That's our campsite behind me. On Monday the 16th, we finally pulled ourselves away from Tillicum Beach and started heading home. Just before Fish Lake on Highway 140, we turned off onto a Forest Service road and found North Fork Campground. It was nice and quiet. It only had 9 sites and was located by Little Butte Creek. Happy birthday, Pat! It's August the 17th. After leaving North Fork Campground, we drove along the western shoreline of Klamath Lake and pulled into a lay-by for a breakfast stop. And so did a few million mosquitoes. We couldn't help laughing as we watched people pull into the lay-by and make a mad dash to the restroom only to find that the door was locked. They'd soon make a hasty retreat to their car, slapping themselves furiously. One gentleman stood outside his open car door trying to brush them off as they swarmed into his car. On the way down Highway 395, a few miles after Adin, we checked out a small campground. I think it was Willow Creek. We thought about spending the night here, but decided to push on and head for home.